When a man buys you a drink, it is not simply a man buying you a drink, it is a man buying you a drink in expectation that something will happen along the line. It is a debt he is accruing to you, saying, I am buying you a drink, so maybe you will sleep with me, so I am wooing you, so I am pressing you, or at the very least that you will get sloshed enough that you will sleep with me and not think that I'm ugly and think that I am worth it. This is not okay. This is unsafe for women. Not only does this not align with the feminist movement, we are protecting women's safety in supporting this as the feminist movement. So firstly, what does the feminist movement want? Primarily, they want the liberation of women. This is female independence and like screw the patriarchy. The feminist movement also exists as an ideal. It is about principles and standing for things, not necessarily the like practical, like you cannot follow the feminist movement's ideals all the time, and that is okay, but they must stand for something as a movement altogether. The feminist movement is also primarily in our modern day concerned with keeping women safe. We see with the sexual assault harassment scandal that is occurring at the moment that keeping women safe is the most important thing. This is like the fourth wave of feminism, protecting women from sexual assault, and sexual assault specifically is a massive primary aim for the feminist movement in our current context. Also, it's not like the feminist movement is intersectional and wants to like better all women. And so my second speaker today will be talking about like heteronormativity. In this regard, the feminist movement protects all women, not just straight women. So what do acts of chivalry look like? We're categorizing these into two levels, like lower levels chivalry, like opening doors or saying ladies first, but like the higher level chivalry is the most important thing in this debate because it's the biggest liability for people's safety. These are the ones that actually have implications that can make women unsafe. This is prolonged chivalrous interactions with either strangers or acquaintances. It's them buying you a drink, it's them buying you a meal, it's an inordinate number of favors from your friend with no expectation of repayment until they ask you to sleep with them and you do not want to. So these are the most dangerous acts, but all in principle, all these acts we don't like. So what does rejecting these acts look like? It's not encouraging. So firstly, we're not encouraging you to reject these acts when it's unsafe for women to do so, because the primary most important thing is that the feminist movement supports like protecting women's safety. It has to be practical in a situation, but it looks like saying, no, thank you, I'm fine. It's being polite and firm. It's holding the door open for the man before the man can hold the door open for you. It's instead, when they hold it open, grabbing it from them and letting them walk through first. It's rejecting the drink they buy you. So my 2 points today is firstly that this is crucial for the safety of women and that chivalry is symbolically unaligned with the feminist movement. So firstly, on the practical of why this is crucial for the safety of women, the problem is, as I explained in my introduction, acts of chivalry are self-serving. Men, like, even if men think they're doing it like for no bad reason, they are doing this in a sense that like they hope to get something out of it. Like people aren't selfless in general, no one is. It's the expectation that when you buy a drink, women will like pay more attention to you and start liking you, and you can expect something of them because you are paying money to them, they will pay you back. The problem is, even if this isn't all the time, we tell you that it is a lot of the time because all humans are selfish, but it is impossible to tell which of the time it is and which of the time it isn't. And the consequences can be so grave if you're wrong that even if this is 1 in 10, it is absolutely worth it for the feminist movement to protect that 1 in 10. So how does this protect you from strangers? This is the situation where someone you've never met comes up to you at the bar and asks you to buy a drink or pays for your dinner. It's that kind of thing. This is the acute situation where you are rapidly building up an emotional debt, but it is actively, and so it can be like actively doing something harmful, trying to spike your drink so you'll get drunk and they'll sleep with you, but it can be more insidious that like it's just buying you a drink in the like building a debt sense that like because they've done something for you, you have to do something back and you might not realize that. What is the danger of this? When you don't pay back the debt, it is very likely they will explode. We see this all the time. This is why like women get date raped. This is why like men will collect the debt anyway, because it is viewed as an expectation they have done something and can ask women to do something back. And the problem is that women don't realize this debt is there because it's not culturally around women. Like women aren't culturally told that this is what they're doing. They're just getting a free drink. it is so important that women reject men before they've accrued the debt. The first reason for this is because you're in a safer situation. You haven't been dancing with a guy all night. Your friends are easily accessible. Like you are likely to be more sober. Like it's so important this happens immediately, that you can protect yourself better. But secondly, men haven't built up this entitlement. When you like don't take the bait, they'll just move on because like men are hoping to find another victim. And when the feminist movement encourages all women to do this, then they won't be able to find a victim. So but in the like opening doors sense of this topic, this can like still be weirdly abusive and can build up this entitlement anyway. And like to a less extreme harm, which is just men shouting at you, but that is still a terrible thing to experience and still makes you feel unsafe and is still incredibly unpleasant for women. So how is this? This can also protect you from friends. This is the kind of harm that happens more slowly and less acutely, but can once again be an even bigger problem. So this looks like favors without reciprocating them. It looks like your friend unconditionally giving you their notes from class. It looks like them driving you everywhere when you never asked for it. It looks like them taking over them. These are the type of friends who are expecting something in return, who think maybe you'll fall in love with them. And you are just viewing it as a friendship because women have been told that friendship is amazing and that kind of thing. This is incredibly insidious because these instances are hard to mediate. They're tricky to spot. Your family and friends think this is a nice guy. You think this is a nice guy. Every woman probably has one of these friendships where the man is just like doing it for their own benefit and you don't realize, and you are just hoping that they are a good person because you are hoping society is better than this. The danger of this is that the debt is accruing and you can have the exact same outbursts. You can have them be violent towards you when they don't do it. You can have them rape you or sexually assault you when you don't do what they say. This is even more dangerous because you are less protected by your family and friends. The trauma lasts longer because you thought this was your friend. You are less likely to be believed when everyone knows that you were friends in the first place and you were probably leading them on. This is emotionally abusive because you're guilt-tripped into thinking, you're gaslit into thinking that you led them on when you absolutely didn't. Women are in no way responsible for the actions of men. We are rejecting them upfront is crucial to stop this build up and thinking that men rejecting them upfront is crucial so they don't think they've accrued some debt that they absolutely haven't. In principle, secondly, we believe that chivalry is symbolically unaligned with the feminist movement. We have three main reasons for this. Firstly, the feminist movement is all about encouraging independence and autonomy. It's not being subject to the independence is not being subject to the opinions and actions of another person. Historically, this is exactly what the feminist movement has been fighting for. It's women being able to earn money. It's women being able to like speak in public without a man. Women have been so long under the control of men, and this is like one of the primary aims of the feminist movement. So this is entirely unaligned with the feminist movement when men buy you a drink because that is unautonomous. Secondly, it breaks down expectations of money and labor. Men often do this in the place of emotional intelligence. Men just spend money thinking it's what women want and how they can express themselves. Spending money doesn't make up for men like not being able to express themselves and have good relationships and actually talk. And thirdly, it's outdated. Women can buy these for themselves. Women are strong enough to open a door. That's not an okay thing that we want to perpetrate as the feminist movement, and that is why we are proud to affirm.
The most important thing to note about the speech you just heard is that it completely ignores the reality that in our world, women are free to opt into these norms of chivalry or choose not to. You do not have to accept this drink in our world because chivalry is a thing. If a woman believes that it is more empowering or unsafe for her to do so, you are more than capable of rejecting it in our world, which kind of renders that entire first affirmative speech moot, because everything they talk about, every harm they identified, can just be opted out of by women with autonomy, with free choice, which is obviously what the feminist movement cares most about. So, now that said, I'm going to do a couple of things in this speech. Firstly, in setup, I'm going to describe the feminist movement and its interests, then what this encouraging would probably look like, then what these acts tend to look like. Finally, then a bit of rebuttal about their main push about like it's used for sex and objectifying women. Then I'm going to talk about why it's principally wrong to make women's lives unnecessarily difficult, the practical benefits for women of accepting chivalry, and why the affirmative team's world would mean women get treated worse. So in terms of setup, what do we think the feminist movement's interests are? Pretty obvious. Things like substantive political change on things like the pay gap and rape culture. We think secondly, it looks like ending gender-based violence like daily microaggressions against women that make it hard for them to exist as a woman. And thirdly, it looks like promoting women's autonomy and choice on, and importantly, not shaming them for the type of feminist they are, or suggesting that if they accept a drink from a man, they are a bad feminist and ought to be shamed by other women for that. That is what we think the feminist movement truly looks like. It's not, we don't agree at all with the affirmative team's characterization here. Secondly, in setup, what we think this encouraging is likely to look like. This looks like media campaigns and social media awareness. It looks like constant messaging from feminist figures. It looks like high-profile feminists like, you know, Emma Watson or Zendaya or whatever, like modeling this behavior to suggest to women how they could go about this. And importantly, it looks like shaming women who don't do this as bad feminists, as like undermining the cause, as actually assisting the patriarchy, which is obviously going to be quite bad for reasons I'll get into later. The problems with this are twofold. Firstly, the feminist movement is not monolithic, right? There are probably going to be women within the movement and high-profile feminists who disagree with you. Obviously, fracturing your movement means you have less political capital. It limits the number of, like, your ability to like reach other people. It probably like means you have fewer resources available to you to campaign for other substantive issues. The second problem with this is that not all women or feminists would even opt into this in the first place, because as I described in my introduction, there are some women who do enjoy being like, you know, treated nicely, who do enjoy getting free drinks and free dinner, which means that the number of women who opt into this and think the feminist movement is for them also gets reduced in the affirmative team as well. That obviously also undermines the movement as a whole. Second, finally then in setup, what do we think these acts look like? We think they look like, you know, general acts of politeness, the two types. Firstly, it's like general politeness, things like, you know, ladies first and opening doors. And secondly, it looks like material things, like buying dinner and drinks, like movie tickets, like paying for trips, like paying for a woman's trips. We note three things importantly. Firstly, this exists alongside other norms in the feminist movement, like the push for substantive things like pay equity. There is more capital for the feminist movement when it focuses on these other things, noting that there is a zero-sum media game. You can only cover so much feminism in like media, and there are people's attention span is fairly limited. They are unlikely to take this particularly seriously because it seems relatively low down on the scale of priorities for the feminist movement, particularly in light of ongoing things like sexual assault crises and that sort of thing. The second important thing to note here is that, as I flagged in my introduction, women currently have the choice whether to opt into these norms or not. We say they should have the agency to choose without having like fearing like the risk of being labeled a bad feminist. We know this is far more in line with the actual principles of the feminist movement, which is to be your own woman. There is no like actively bad kind of feminist. We think that is fundamentally the most important thing they care about in this debate. Right? We would also note importantly that because existing norms mean that some women choose to reject this behavior anyway, things like, you know, girl boss feminism, like in movies and TV shows, many women do opt into this already. We don't see any need to make the feminist movement, like, you know, coerce women and use them as a battering ram for these priorities. On the affirmative team side, the key comparative in this debate is that on the affirmative side, women who like currently choose to opt in and accept these like chivalry benefits have to either get shamed for it or have to reject it, even when it would be materially in their interest. That instantly loses them this debate. So, before I move on to my substantive, one piece of rebuttal. Their main push is that, you know, chivalry is used to get sex, it is objectifying, it is often like quite dangerous for women. Three responses here. The first thing is, as I've already talked about, there is choice in both worlds. If you feel a situation is unsafe if you accept this man's drink, you can obviously just reject it and leave. Obviously, that's not applicable in most circumstances, but we think like a lot of the potential dangers for women are like quite symmetrical here, because as I'll talk about later, rejection is likely to make men, like bad men, particularly angry. Second response, bad men don't need an excuse to objectify women and attempt to sleep with them. And more importantly, we don't think it's incumbent on women to like fix them by changing their behavior. We think these like unsafe situations are going to be largely symmetrical because men fucking suck. They are still going to attempt to sleep with women. They are still going to attempt to do things like date rape, like the feminist team talk about. We don't think women being like slightly more rejecting of like, you know, the kind offers or the ability to like pay for dinner or drinks is actually going to change the behavior of men who've already proven they don't see women as real humans with real feelings and agency. That's simply never going to happen. Thirdly, we would note the messaging in the affirmative team's world is substantially worse, unlike what they wanted to tell you, because now the feminist movement is effectively saying, if you accept a drink from this man, not only do you have to sleep with him, but now you're also a bad feminist. Not only does it reduce women's agency, it then shames them for opting into narratives that they themselves might benefit from. That is obviously terrible. That's why their main push falls in this debate. So then, 3 points of substantive. Firstly, why it's principally wrong for the feminist movement to make women's lives unnecessarily difficult. We would note firstly, there are lots of existing difficulties for women already. Things like material differences like the pay gap, things like just broad sexism in the power structures of society, things like worse representation in politics, in media, in like big business. That is obviously important to note as like context for this. Secondly, we would note that there are already expectations incumbent on women to do things for men that are like simply not seen as chivalrous, but sort of just like a requirement. That looks like, you know, childcare, raising kids, motherly things, doing the cooking and cleaning. We think there's now not even any small compensation flowing back to women of the expectation that men should do something for them. We think that just makes society broadly more sexist and worse for women. We would make their lives better. It gets them kinder treatment, particularly in the workplace. It gets them material benefits. They don't have to they don't have to like rush for doors and be constantly on edge and alert like the affirmative team wants them to. We think the right for women to opt into this is quite fundamental, and it is principally incredibly immoral for the feminist movement to deliberately make women make their lives actively worse in order to like substantiate change. We don't think you have to get women to like sacrifice that small comforts, and we don't think the feminist movement ought to do that anyway. And as I've already described, no women are likely to opt in, very few women are likely to opt into that anyway, so your benefits are quite limited. Secondly, what are the benefits to women here? We think like firstly, it's like relatively harmless and polite things, just like mean you get treated better. Secondly, you get unique financial benefits, like, and that stacks up and accumulates over time. It also just like feels quite good emotionally to receive things. And thirdly, we think it's especially important to poorer women, because in the affirmative team's world, poorer women either can't or won't buy into these narratives. We think this is like likely to be rich white feminism. Fourthly, this is particularly important in like in a new workplace, just in order to make a good impression, like be treated nicely by your co-workers. So we think it's a valid choice for women. Finally, then, in substantive, why do we think women get treated worse in the affirmative team's world? The first reason is that there is a massive signaling effect to men because of the fact that celebrities are the ones promoting this and there's likely to be a lot of coverage. Secondly, because it's endorsed by the feminist movement, which means there's like a false veneer of speaking on behalf of all women and therefore being like the voice of women. And thirdly, it's only going to be corrupted by and co-opted by bad faith right-wing media, which means that a lot of men are going to be receiving incorrect information, like skewed perspectives on what this actually tends to look like. The impacts of this are pretty bad because firstly, nice men will stop being nice because out of genuine concern. That still makes women's lives worse. Other men who are less nice are going to be upset and feel ridiculed for like, maybe these women clearly don't appreciate me. Now they're likely to do things like slam doors or refuse to pay. It is a constant environment of microaggressions that is obviously worse for women, and shitty men who already hate women get even worse. This delegitimizes complaints by women. It takes the focus off other women's issues by limiting your political capital in an already fractured movement. It makes the feminist movement shame women who opt out, and existing anger at women by people like incels get worse because now women are apparently institutionally refusing to be nice, except you being nice to them. At the end of this debate, this was a disastrous idea for women. You ought always give them the choice to opt in to good norms that made their lives better, and that's why we're going to win this debate.
Panel, the fact that most people in the world know a woman who has said something that sounds similar to the following: I never expected it to be him. My friends thought he was so nice. I don't think anyone will believe me because this man has been nice. It was my coworker. It was my boss. It was my friend. It was my friend of friends. This outlines how encompassing this behavior is in any sort of relationship a woman has ever entered into. This extends to just things like parasocial relationships, or also just seeing strangers in public. We think this issue is so pervasive, and that is why we need this model. Right. So I'm going to do three things in this speech. Firstly, with some material about feminist goals, respond to the men angry and they will think people are bad feminists. And lastly, some notes on the goals of the feminist movement and a point on heteronormativity, right? So I'm going to respond to the issue of what the whole bad feminist premise was in Sam's speech, right? So essentially, we get a couple of things from them. They essentially just tell us that with this, it's going to be very, very bad for these women because they're going to be shamed as bad feminists. We had a couple of responses to this, right? We had first framed, at Chloe, that the feminist movement actually probably prioritizes the safety of women, right? We think that this is the ultimate goal. Women who have done things just to be safe, or women that didn't, yell at the dude that opened the door for her because she was so scared that she was going to get the door flung in her face by that man, as was the example before. We think that the feminist movement would not shame these women, right? But obviously a goal of the feminist movement is also just not victim blaming, right? We think that the feminist movement would be able to uphold this. We don't think that these women are actually going to be shamed by the feminist movement, right? Because we avoid shame by just by the virtue of a goal of the feminist movement being not victim blaming, right? Secondly, we're not talking about men buying you dinner, right? We're not this is when you're many months into a relationship. We don't think that the feminist movement is so trigger happy to just shame women as you wanted to make it out to be, right? But also in terms of making women's life harder, it's harder for these women to just reject these things. We actually think the thing that makes women's life significantly harder is things like assault. Unless the other team can prove that you actually reduce assault, they literally cannot win this debate because we're going to prove why we can, right? note. We also just heard about how like men are going to be angry at this and you lose like some element of political capital, right? We think that this is not some like debt that men are paying off. You can't pay off the wages I don't earn in margaritas, right? Like you have to actually be comparative here, right? And see, this is not a debt that is being paid off by men. This is a separate debt that has been accrued for men to get women to sleep with them. Also, the men that are going to be this angry, slam doors in women's faces and hurt them will also probably the most likely men to want to harm these women if we can actually just prevent these men from like being able to like build up what they perceive as a debt from these women. We are so happy to do that, right? So a final note on capital. They said that men were going to be symmetrically angry, but at least what we do on our side is we don't let these men perceive that a debt has been accrued, right? And as you characterize, if these men are so bad, they will come and collect this debt, and they are going to collect it in the most horrific and violent ways. We never let this debt accrue. We encourage women to never let this debt accrue. We make it the norm to never let this debt accrue. We reduce that man's mechanism to harm that woman. That is a reason why we win this debate, right? And just to finalize that, we would always pick the one. We would always turn 10 nice men down. I don't think that 9 out of 10 men are actually nice, but I would always turn those 9 nice men down to ensure that one woman doesn't get assaulted. So worth it, right? But notes on like what the goals of the feminist movement actually were. Notes that in framing it, Chloe, we told you that this was likely to be an opt-in system. Why is this true? Firstly, because as we told you at Chloe, that it's like the feminist movement is not like a set of rules, but it's a set of ideals to look up to. We would obviously encourage this. Read the topic, right? We obviously wouldn't force women to opt in when it is unsafe, but also we think that women are not stupid, and we think that they are good at deciding when things are unsafe. We think that women would obviously always choose when it was safe to like adopt this principle. Like we think that this is good. Okay, on friendliness, right? We always propped women doing what they needed to get out of this situation. We think that men are likely to feel entitled to women's bodies, but we get rid of their mechanism to do this, right? Also, a note on how this improves like workplace interactions. A lot of this happens in things like the workplace. Women feel like my boss gave me this, my boss did this for me. We didn't think that we didn't want these women to feel like they owed these men anything. We took this away in our world, right? Okay, notes on safety, right? So as we told you at Chloe, like we don't think the majority of these men are nice. We think what's more likely is these men are like self-serving in some degree, right? We think that even if these men do not have an intention to be violent and like sexually assault these women, we think that at least they have some sort of like self-serving idea. And even if it is not going to manifest in an extremely violent way, in terms of like a violent assault, what we think is likely to happen is these men still feel like a debt has been accrued to them. They are likely to isolate that woman socially. They're likely to do things like gaslight that woman into saying, you led me on, you did this, and then go and tell that woman's friends and social circle that she led me on, she did this, she's a bad woman, she's a bad person. So we think that even if, right, like things like assault is symmetrical, we think that which we don't, we think that we at least reduce things like women being gaslit in their personal relationships, women being gaslit in their friendships by men that put on the facade of being nice, right? We think that any man that is trying to like load you up with drinks at the bar is not actually probably a very nice man. I would love some analysis as to why they were. Okay, notes here. We're going to separate this into two areas. What the benefits of this are for people that are straight, like why it is good to reject strangers, but then also why it is particularly important to reject things like friends. Couple notes on this. We think that strangers, right, even if it is not going to be like a huge explosion, right, we think that like, well, they're still trying to like load you up with alcohol. This is probably really, really bad. Then they're going to try and probably guilt trip you into sleeping with you, and sometimes they are also just trying to spike you. We stop this from happening. We make women safe, right? But also, and more pervasively, friends and colleagues, right? We think that these people build up an emotional debt. They will turn your friends against you. They will perceive that you do not pay off this debt. They build up a sense of entitlement, and they will come and collect. We prevent this from happening in this world because we encourage the majority of women to reject. We make it so that rejection is a norm that is possible for women. Right. So where do we get at the end of this? We think that like all of their framing as to like how men act and how women are going to act and how the feminist movement is going to act is like just inherently false and not likely to happen. We have proved at Chloe and then at me why the feminist movement is A, not likely to shame these women, B, why these men are not mostly nice, and even if they are nice and not trying to assault this woman, they probably have like perverse incentives as that are self-serving, right? So we prevented this in this world. We would always turn down the 9 nice men to save that one woman. But a note on heteronormativity, right? We think this is particularly bad for people in queer relationships because this pressure goes, like the pressure to like pay for things goes to people, firstly, that are masculine presenting. But another reasons why it's bad, right? We don't think that queer people should have hetero norms pushed onto them. But another note on why this is harmful, right? We think that like this is particularly bad because men expect women to accept their drinks. We think this leads to an increase in gender-based violence, but also an increase of violence against the LGBT community, particularly towards queer women. We encourage all women to be able to reject these advances, so it becomes possible for women who are particularly vulnerable to reject these advances, because we actually just reduce assault, because we reduce the amount of gaslighting that happens in women's personal relationships, because we actually stick to the values of the feminist movement. I'm so proud to affirm.
There are 2 things incredibly important to the modern feminist movement that Side Affirmative has decided to ignore and actively go against in this debate. The first is supporting women's choice to be the sort of women they want to be, to all be feminists, even if they choose things differently. This looks empirically like not shaming women who choose to be housewives or like domestic carers, and not encouraging them to be otherwise. But the second thing they do is they tell us that it is a good idea to blame women for their actions when they get them into trouble. They tell us that it is women's fault, or they are accumulating some sort of debt when they accept drinks from men. And in order to avoid this, they should not accept drinks. They should not allow men to be nice to them. They should actively make their lives harder because it will get them out of things like sexual assault. That means they have to then support things like women not wearing revealing clothes out, because similarly, that is probably likely to remove the opportunity, also make it less likely for men to approach you and come up to you. I think those 2 things are incredibly antithetical to the feminist movement. That's why we win this debate. 2 things in this speech. Firstly, I'll engage with their push on sexual assault and violence. And then secondly, on other effects to women and the feminist movement. So firstly, on sexual assault and violence. And this is where the Affirmative is trying to win this debate. They do this, they have one big push here, and that is that accepting these drinks and acts of chivalry makes your life dangerous. So 4 responses from us. Firstly, men do this anyway, okay? So bad men are not going to come up to you, offer you a drink, and when you say no, be like, okay, all right, guess I won't try and sleep with you anymore. Guess I won't attack you. Obviously, they will find other ways to do this and other ways to justify this. They can do this by talking about what you're wearing. That is why the feminist movement does not currently have a policy of encouraging women to cover up when they go out and drink at night. That is something that is the men's problem. That is something we fix by targeting men. Obviously, women should not have to change their behavior in order to do so. And also, men will probably just still consider this debt anyway. If you have a conversation, they will consider that debt, because men think they're entitled to sleep with women because they don't really see you as a proper person. That is what these evil men think. That is what they're going to continue to think on their side of the house. But secondly, on our side, it is often safer to accept these acts of chivalry. For example, if you think that if a man is being particularly aggressive and forcing some food on you or trying to get you to walk through a door, and you were scared of saying no and you think it would be safer to say yes, then obviously we should give women the choice to do that. They tell us that, well, women can opt out of this when they feel unsafe. But firstly, obviously they do that on our side already. And that is because firstly, women aren't stupid and can often tell when men are being aggressive or trying to get them or creepy. But secondly, also because existing norms mean that women, things like girl boss narratives mean that women are already probably unlikely to opt out of this when they don't feel comfortable or when it doesn't feel particularly empowering for them. But thirdly, and most importantly, what is unique about our side is that we give women the choice to choose when to do this and when not to do this. So they can do this when they feel like it is safe to do so. On their side, it is much more difficult to accept these things when it is safer for women to do so. And that is because you're thinking, well, the feminist movement tells me that I should always reject it because it was always safer. That is the message I am receiving. That is because people like Zendaya and Taylor Swift tell us that we should always reject this. Clearly, that must be better for me and my safety. How do I know better than the whole of the feminist movement combined and their message and direction? That means that on our side, you are likely to make less legitimate and less clear decisions about how you respond to this behavior. So they also did not respond to the reasons we told you about why sexual assault is much worse on their side. That is firstly because huge messaging effects that tell men that women do not want them to be nice to them and that their attempts to be nice have been rejected. That makes all men worse, and it makes the particularly bad men already more violent when they feel rejected, when they think women don't want them anymore, and not only one woman, but all feminists do not want to sleep with them. Sam gave you a number of impacts for that we're just not engaged with. But secondly, we told you this is a huge waste of capital. That is because with all the effort they are putting into promoting this message, you can actually do things about sexual assault. You can actually do things like fund sexual assault helplines, have systems like buses that pick women up from pubs in the night so they don't have to go home alone. Obviously, that's better to our side and mutually exclusive at the point at which capital is finite. But secondly, it is so much harder to do this when men are not on board, because obviously the majority of people voting on these issues are men. So if you tell men that women don't want them anymore, that they don't want them to be nice to them, and you are unsympathetic to their even small efforts to be respectful and nice, they are unlikely to see women as more sympathetic and unlikely to support these. That's why you never get legitimate change. At the end of this is what they cared about most of this debate with sexual assault and preventing that. If what they thought the feminist movement cared about most in this debate was safety, we win by a mile because we can actually get substantive change on our side, and we offer women the choice to act in ways that are safer for them, regardless, depending on the situation. Okay, secondly, now on other effects of women. Firstly, they tell us here that women are gaslighted into thinking they owe men things when they get drinks, so their friends are less likely to help them. But two main responses here. Firstly, obviously on their side, you create a norm that accepting a drink means that you owe men something, because you are telling women that it is dangerous to not accept, that they have to not accept drinks, because if they do, men will think they owe them something. I think on our side it is a lot more fun for women to be able to accept drinks from men, and then obviously they don't have an obligation to sleep with them, right? And they can just not do that. Where it's different is particularly awful men that are likely to be aggressive to women and think they have this debt. But obviously, as I told you, those men act the same under their side and will find other reasons for doing that. So it is unclear why this transaction is legitimate. On their side, you create a norm that it is. But secondly, sometimes you just have to accept these advances. If you are a woman entering a new workforce and your boss does things like open the door for you and says, ladies first, or offers to buy you a drink or get you dinner, and that is a job you've been waiting for and trying to get, oh my God, if you feel pressured to say no to these things because of what the feminist movement tells you, when often they are incredibly harmless, and very likely to be so, then that means you're at risk of losing that job. So obviously you feel pressured to do so, especially in a situation where you are new or where you feel just generally vulnerable because you're a woman. On our side, you were allowed to say no, but you can also say yes. On their side, if you feel pressured into saying yes than that, you then think you're a bad feminist and you hate yourself. And that is why social movements that tell the cross groups of people what to do and to beat themselves up to some long-term goal are terrible, because minorities and oppressed people should not have to bear the burden of this, and they should not have to hate themselves for acting in ways that are not the same as the feminist movement. That is why we have a reveal preference for offering women the choice. It's additionally, if you go out with a man and you actually just cannot afford food and it is easier to accept it from him, you should not have to feel guilty for that, because it is safer for women on our side, because you get terrible messaging effects on them and men get worse so proud.
I think
this team loses this debate at the moment they give the most baffling characterization of how social movements actually work, especially one like feminism, which obviously is broad and obviously comes from a bunch of disparate sources. To the extent that there was any kind of unifying message, that unifying message included a lot of things that women mediate into their own lives all the time. That common message, for instance, included that you should not have to remove your body hair. And yet I, like a outspoken proud feminist, do it anyway because I've mediated the benefits and harms myself. I've decided that, you know, getting into fresh sheets with shaved legs is actually just like, you know, fucking baller. And that is just something that I want to do personally, which seems to suggest, even though that's a lower modality, like, you know, kind of norm to accept, seems to suggest that that feminism is not a rule book. Feminism is not a just set of guidelines that you must follow or else you are completely invalid. When they talk about like we would support women's right to choose, that is because of third wave choice feminism that was there in the first place. However, not every choice a woman made in her life was a feminist one, but we tell you that that does not mean that she is not a feminist, and that does not mean that the feminist movement itself should not stand for those principles. I'm firstly going to ask, are women safer? Because negative are correct when they say that, when they identify this as our path to victory in this debate, because I just actually don't think that woman is going to care about the principle that she should not have to do anything about her behavior to protect herself from men when she's in the hospital getting a rape kit done, when she's talking to a detective who does not believe her. So when we say that this is a debt that has been accrued, we obviously mean that this is what men view as a debt and not one that exists in an abstract. That is the norm that happens at the moment. And anybody who has ever been to a bar, anybody who has ever been, you know, like a woman in a bar, knows that if you accept a drink from a man, he will not leave you alone for the rest of the night. That has happened to me. That has happened to every single one of my friends. Worse things have happened to every single one of my friends. So we tell you that men will collect this will collect this debt in a variety of ways. Either they will gaslight the shit out of you, especially if it is something like a long-term friendship, until you feel so guilty and horrible that you have led this person on, and you think that there is something wrong with you for not having any feelings for them, and that you should probably just sleep with them to get it over with anyway. Or we tell you that they will collect it incredibly violently. If they are your friend and they have been your friend for years, they will isolate you, they will get you alone, they will lie about what you did to them. They will lie and say that you led them on. They will lie and say that you said yes to it. And they laid the groundwork for that. They bought your trust. They bought your goodwill through all of these non-reciprocal favors across the entirety of your friendship that were branded as chivalry. They were branded as just doing something nice for women just because. They say it's nice for women to get free stuff. We tell you that this stuff was never free. It wasn't free at all. And even if it was free some of the time, maybe there were some nice men out there. If 500 snakes are running towards you all at once, running, snakes don't run. You know what I mean, slithering. And I tell you, it's okay. Only 50 of them are incredibly poisonous and will literally kill you and or maim you for life. I'm running the fuck away from those snakes. I don't care what the other snakes think about me or think about my movement, because I'm not wanting to die of a venomous snake bite. That was incredibly silly. We told you that we protected women from the most violent of instances. We protected them from emotional violence as well. But secondly, they want to talk an enormous amount about nice men. And then Sam gives a hilarious characterization at first, like truly baffling, where, when we alienate these nice men by saying that women don't want them anymore and women don't want nice things from them anymore, instead of holding that door open, they will slam that door in her face. Instead of buying her a drink, they will yell at her. What they neglect to mention is that the kind of men who would do that, and this is why their analysis abruptly stops on this issue every single time that they've presented it, because it stops at the point at which they have to deal with the fact that if you accept that affection, if you go down the timeline that we to very little coherent response tell you at first and then again at second happens in these instances, you do not tell you what happens at the end of that timeline. That if a man was willing to slam a door in a woman's face because she did not thank him when she walked through it, obviously he would rape you. Obviously he would rape you. Like, that is exactly the kind of men that would do the most violent, horrific shit to women in those situations. We do not see why that is not the case, because nice men, especially at the point, by the way, that this is a societal norm that is disseminated, or is a, for instance, norm that the feminist movement encourages or supports, and there's some discourse, apparently they're going to have, like, I don't know, fucking Lizzo talking about it, or Taylor Swift, at the point at which that is a norm, the good men who are feminists and like women are going to see this, are going to be like, okay, next time I try and buy a woman a drink and she says no thank you politely but firmly, Maybe it is not because I'm a worthless piece of garbage and no woman will ever love me. Maybe it is just because women are now much more conscientious of the fact that men have been emotionally abusing them and gaslighting them and taking advantage of them for literally decades with this exact message. The other thing that they claim, though, is they cannot claim the premise that women should not be responsible for their behavior making men violent, and then rely on a mechanism in which women's behavior makes men more violent. That is insane. And if they accept that premise, then this does happen to women, right? And we do accept that there is a harm that in response to women's behavior, rather than because of it, men can act in particular ways. They accept our premise and accept our mechanisms. We tell you that when this happens societally, it becomes way easier for individual women who are perhaps vulnerable, who are perhaps not outspoken, who are perhaps slight of stature, or who are perhaps queer, or who are perhaps trans, who know that they could be murdered if that person finds out that they are trans. Those are the people that we protect at the point at which the feminist movement encourages this. The second question I'm going to ask is, are women bad feminists now for doing this? Because their biggest push here, and the one that actually stands at the end of that, is that women will be shamed as bad feminists if they opt into the chivalry at all. And then they spout a bunch of stuff about third wave choice feminism, which I actually just think is like Sarah Palin choosing to run for president for vice president doesn't make her a good feminist. Not every choice that women make is a feminist one, and that is okay. Why is this untrue, though? The first thing is to say that the feminist women look at other things, because they say this is analogous to telling women what to wear. We would say that actually this is more akin to telling women that, hey, maybe try not to walk home alone at night, and if you do, tell somebody where you are, right? That is the thing that the feminist movement encourages women to do. And would you prefer that they stop doing that because women shouldn't have to mediate their actions for the sake of male violence? Or would you just accept the premise that maybe you should just fucking do that? Maybe you should just text your parents to say that you're going to be home in 15 minutes, and if you haven't arrived home by that point, to get worried about you and to go look for you. Maybe that is a norm that you would accept. That dressing promiscuous, like dressing in revealing clothing or being promiscuous, fall into like a set of sexual behaviors that are uniquely open to shame. We tell you that this is largely not at first instance a sexual behavior, but it is very much a behavior that women are pressured into because of the exact rhetoric that the negative team uses. Because these men are nice guys, because you should let them down easily. They shouldn't let them down easily. Those are predators. They are trying to hurt them. Feminists also, though, hate victim blaming, and especially right now, especially when sexual assault is the focus of the fourth wave of feminism, after Me Too, after massive amounts of sexual assault being discovered in Australian politics, that is the focus of the feminist movement. They do not victim blame. They did not victim blame Brittany Higgins for being drunk when she was raped in a minister's, in a minister's office. That is not something that they would do. Negative team lose this debate when they can't grapple with this dialectical. They can't accept that both of these things are true. That the feminist movement can both encourage women to take actions to preserve their own safety and also not shame them if something happens to them. But also, secondly, this probably gets worse because absent this message in the world, and when getting free stuff is nice, that woman gets assaulted anyway, as we tell you, and then she gets victim blamed because there isn't this discourse, and because people love victim blaming anyway. When you don't have this conversation about the way in which men, which I think this is just a scathing message at men, so it's unclear that we can't hold men to account as well. When you get this message out there that men have been doing this and are doing this so insidiously, that is the point at which you protect victims who have been victimized in this way. The last thing to say is that it is just incredibly common for women to take the parts of feminism that are useful to them. We think that this should be something that they can adopt. We think we give them the tools to do that. We were so proud to affirm.
I think what's really important to note about the opposition's entire case, right, is that it's contingent on men just being incredibly rational, respectful actors who will realize that when a woman says no to a drink, then it's no to everything, and they should just leave them alone. Given all the characterizations the opposition have made about men, right, that they think that they require something from women and that women are indebted to them, that probably means that whole characterization doesn't stand up. When you have this inherent tension and contradiction in their case, then their entire point about women being less likely to be assaulted or harmed was just absolutely probably not going to occur, and the harms of shitty men were just symmetric on both sides of the house. That's basically their entire case dealt with. But let's look at three things in this debate. First, what is the feminist movement? What do they prioritize? How do they act?
Secondly, does this benefit women or put them at risk? And thirdly, support the movement. On the first, the opposition's kind of push down the bench is the idea that like women can opt in or out because we're just encouraging things, like we don't force women to act in a certain way. I think this is probably incorrect, not the push that they should make, right? Because first off, if it's so important that women do what the opposition says to preserve their own safety, then obviously the feminist movement has to do some forceful encouraging. That probably includes mechanisms like shame, mechanisms like modeling behavior on prominent feminists and saying that if you don't do that, then you're a bad feminist, to actually encourage women to act that way if it is in their best interest, right? Obviously, that means that the shame mechanism is probably occurring, right? But even if that wasn't true, and the feminist movement was just like prioritizing these messages in like a friendly, approachable way, women are probably likely to shame themselves or to shame each other, even if it is not the movement that does so. There's probably some level of shame mechanism that forces women to act in a certain way, right? The opposition's push at third is just literally our case that the feminist movement can say you should do things and then you can just choose, right? We thought that given that the feminist movement had to make this push, given the imperative was so high as the opposition brought to us, that meant that our case is literally just like we should allow women to make choices that are best for them, right? Because like the key goals of the feminist movement is that they should actually trust women to know and choose what is best for them. They should trust women to choose what makes them feel safe and what makes them feel empowered, right? Because like the opposition's case would also necessitate feminists telling women not to wear mini skirts because that means they're probably more likely to get assaulted, right? Whereas our case would say that, you know, women can choose whether that's a trade-off that they want to make or something that empowers them. Obviously, on our side of the house, the feminist movement prioritizes choice and prioritizes letting women make choices that are best and most advantageous for them without any level of shame, right? So obviously, on our side of the debate, we just prop choice, and the opposition has to necessarily prop that either one of two things, either that women shouldn't make those choices, or two, that women should be told that they shouldn't make those choices. Those things are probably both equally bad, right? So onto the second idea of how does this benefit women or put them at risk. I think the most important thing to consider is actually how do women make decisions about whether or not they actually would accept a drink from a man, for example, right? Because I think that the cases where there's a leery man shoving drinks down your throat are probably a wash, because we conceded that on both sides of the house, that is a situation in which women should do whatever makes them safest, and whatever makes them most safe in that situation. Both sides have just pushed that out of debate, right? So what this debate actually becomes about is like the situations where there is not an obvious correct or safest choice for women, right? At this point, I think it's quite fair to say that women are actually rational actors, right? Because they know that when a man buys them a drink, it is probably likely that maybe that man does want to sleep with them, and maybe that man does actually want something from them, right? Then we think that women should be able to choose whether the benefits of receiving that drink outweigh the harms. Women should be able to actually just make the choices that are most empowering and effective to them, right? On the opposition, they say that women should always reject those types of advances. We think that for women, particularly for women who are poor or don't have enough capital to just like actively reject things all the time, we think if women desire to want to actually receive these benefits, then they should, right? So the opposition's kind of two other pushes on benefits versus harms to women. First, it creates a heteronormative narrative. Let's note that we thought that LGBT women on our side would be able to reject these advances, and that like you're less likely to get support for people after sexual assault. We thought that victim blaming was probably symmetric on both sides of the house. What was actually the marginal case in this debate was the situations in which it was safe and acceptable for women to accept these types of benefits. What we told you from first to literally no response is that there are actually reasons for women to want to accept these types of things. Women might want doors open for them because it's actually just nice and polite. Women might want free drinks or free meals or whatever because they don't want to pay for that stuff themselves. If that is empowering to women, that is just a choice that they should be able to make, given that like issues of safety are actually probably not as probably symmetric on both sides of the house, right? What the opposition actually does in this case is the opposition does two things. First, they just create an incredibly worse narrative, right? because they actually tell women and men by extension that if women do accept those things, that means that women are willing to open themselves to things like assault, and that is probably actually a narrative of victim blaming. The opposition's push here from Connor is just this idea that, like, okay, well, we can support people, we can tell people that they should try to do these things to avoid being assaulted and support them after being assaulted. I think that telling women to do things to avoid being assaulted is, like, their narrative is probably so much worse. We say these are choices you can make if that is what makes you feel comfortable, whereas the opposition says these are choices you should make if you don't want to be assaulted at all. That is probably a significantly more harmful narrative that is more likely to shame women who like actually don't, who get treated poorly by men, because it creates this kind of idea that these relationships are inherently transactional and that women can't engage in them because because women just have to sell themselves within those relationships, right? It also creates this narrative of shame where women who are maybe poorer or less privileged and who want to opt into these types of benefits that they can receive now have to feel shame, like they can't be feminists. The types of women who are able to opt out of these narratives easily are likely to be like white girl boss feminists with lots of capital. We think that this means that the most vulnerable women actually become shamed and feminism becomes incredibly non-accessible to them. So we thought that on the whole, women should be able to decide what benefits them, what puts them at risk in this debate. But finally, on this idea of support for the movement, right? We gave you just a couple of pushes from first that just did not receive a response. Right? I think the first thing to know is that not all women co-opting on the opposition side probably fractures the feminist movement and gets less support from women for feminism. But also we gave you a couple of other pushes. We explained that you probably get less male support for feminism because like this is seen as just like women rejecting nice men and feminists just like hating men and feminists not respecting men. But like we think that that is a narrative that gets pushed from lots of right-wing media. That is the type of narrative that men are likely to interpret, right? That means that you just waste all your capital on a narrative discussion that is probably not useful to women and is probably not useful for gaining broader movement support. On our side of the house, we can do significantly better things with this capital, like actually use the capital we have to prevent and help victims of sexual assault in ways that are actually conducive and useful to them. Or we can do things like put capital into policies that benefit women, like things like closing gender pay gaps or like more maternity leave, rather than taking up all our media airtime with things like should women be bought drinks or not. Obviously, within this debate, this is probably the most important issue because it is what actually has the most effect on women's lives, given that the whole idea about safety was actually awash in this debate. So what have we told you? First, we told you that the feminist movement should prioritize choice, and our side is the only side that gets you choice without a level of shame. Secondly, we proved to you that all of the opposition's material about assault was probably symmetric. So in the instances where women could safely accept these things, they should be allowed to do so if that is what if they just think those benefits should accrue. Thirdly, we've proved to you why we're more likely to get support for the movement and support for things that actually benefit women on our side of the house. So proud to oppose.